Anthony Freed again, talking to some of the most interesting people at RSA 2024. Ran into my old friend, Mike Daugherty. Mike, how you doing?
I'm well. Good to be here, sir.
Mike is the CEO of LabMD, and he's also a best-selling author. And he's also survived some incredible, I guess, incidents, incursions by the...
regulatory overreach.
Yeah,
in spades.
So, I find it really interesting, your experience, with the FTC, with the SEC, with the FBI, with all the way down the list, right? I play in the ransomware space right now, and things are getting a little bit more serious for C-levels, for boards of directors. We've got, for the first time, a couple of CISOs that have been named in major regulatory actions, lawsuits, the criminal stuff, yeah, potentially. The heat's getting turned up, and your experience is so relevant to this. Can you give us kind of a recap of?
In 2008, I had a medical laboratory. We were cancer diagnostics. We had 750,000 patients. We diagnosed one day. The phone rings. Some guy says, "We've found 9,000 of your patients out in cyberspace." In that day and time, 9,000 customers, patients, whatever being out would be like headline.
Yeah.
Now we're so desensitized. You say 90 million people.
70 million.
You can't even get media. Right. Oh, a breach. Who? Oh, okay. Well, whatever. But it was a different time. And also, I always to remind people that people thought a breach back then was a breech birth. Like, breach was not in the lexicon.
Yeah.
So I'm like this newbie I'm the early adopter of dealing with regulators. And I said something that no one ever believes, which is I didn't do it. It's like, you're the CEO. You did. And so it was this terrifying experience of just saying I didn't do it and prove what we did do wrong. And all that was happening is this guy had this racket. We didn't know it at the time, but he was breaking into computers, taking files. He was working with the FBI and the Federal Trade Commission, and they didn't know at the time he was a bad guy. The FTC learned he was a bad guy later. But the racket he was doing was using their software, breaking into computers, stealing files, and then calling up the companies, letting them assume they were breached. Yeah. Oh, we found your stuff floating out in cyberspace, which was a ruse. And if you hire our services, make sure it goes away. And that was easy money. And then, unfortunately, I had a different responsibility since we were healthcare and patients, and such a visceral reaction at the time from people was very different than now. And it's hard to remember how things were.
HIPAA was just getting spun up.
It wasn't even HIPAA. And it's funny because people do think HIPAA, but this wasn't even a HIPAA violation. And Health and Human Services wrote it wasn't a HIPAA violation. But it doesn't matter when you're out into it's almost like a viral mob going crazy. Yeah. And it's HIPAA and you did something wrong and your security sucks. And I'm like, what? How did it even get out? And they won't even tell you this. So you're fending all this accusation, and what happened was I wouldn't pay the ransom, right? I wouldn't hire him. And so the government called and started investigating me 2 years later, and that went on for 3 years. And I was so shocked by the lack of rights we have. I realized we don't have...
Because you were being extorted.
I was being extorted.
You kind of expected the government to come in and help you, right?
And I'm being investigated. And now I know enough working with the government over through Medicare through the years that the hotline of complaining from patients, for example, is nothing but a way to vent your frustration. Nothing's going to happen. When they start investigating someone, it's really from some inside relationship or tip or something. So the second the Federal Trade Commission sent me a letter saying we're under a non-public inquiry, I knew they had to be working together. And I started researching, and I saw them at congressional testimonies together. And my lawyers thought I was like nuts. You say these things you know are true and they're evidentiary, but your lawyers just stare at you deadpan and think you're crazy.
Yeah. Stop talking.
It's the hardest part of it all.
Yeah.
And so
that's got to be like frustrating as
it's
hell,
Kafka.
Right? Yeah.
It's Kafka, or it's, I don't know, Atlas Shrugged. It's all of it. It's just and you just have to sort of just, I don't know. Hindsight's 20/20 because I wrote a book about it. I was so outraged. I wrote a book. It's like a story. I didn't want to look like a screaming maniac with a picket sign outside in the rain. And so I wrote as a narrative nonfiction, and I had a lot of good people around me.
And what is that book called?
The Devil Inside the Beltway. I'm a bad salesman. The Devil Inside the Beltway.
Yeah,
available.
It's a great book.
Still does well, actually. It's been out for 10 years because it's really about what's it like to go through a government investigation. That's what it is.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, because, I've been writing a lot lately about cyber attacks happen, and at the end of the day, everybody goes home, right? Except for the IR team who's dealing with the response and stuff. But now we've got some CISOs who've been named in regulatory actions and lawsuits and stuff. We've got potentially the heat going up to the C-level if they can't keep throwing the CISO under the bus and stuff. This is getting very, very real.
Well,
and you
it's
lived
been
it,
going.
right?
It's not. What's new is that people are paying attention because people are paying attention because it's happening to them. I remember speaking at Black Hat, being shocked because I'm like, these people think I'm up here to entertain them. Yeah. It's like, what is? Oh, and there's a couple guys in the audience that are mad at me. I'm here to warn you. Yeah. It was like, and so I was kind of like,
it's like,
wow.
Paul Revere, keep it down.
I
It's
know.
3 o'clock
I was
in the
just
morning.
like, folks, this is your butt, not mine. I'm already dead. So I'm just trying to let you. And there was just insane pushback from the power grid, and that's there were just things I didn't know, and that's the things you want to tell people now. Like, God, I did try Joe Sullivan. I was like, dude, you are just. Really, it's all about
the CISO from Uber.
Uber.
Yeah.
It's like it's head on a spike. The playbook is the same. It is not changed. Regulators can't get everybody. So they want to get somebody and they want to hold that head on a spike. Why do they put heads up on the spikes over bridges in the 15th, 16th century? Because they want the masses afraid. They want you to see this will happen to you. Because they can't get to all of you. Now, that's different and separate from guilt or not guilt. But you have to understand why do they pick someone? Why do they pick a case? Why do they pick somebody? And there's general truths or things to know. And because I'm not, it was kind of a disadvantage that I was with my own company that just had 50 employees and 10 million sales.
Yeah, you're a small
we
business
did
owner.
cancer detection center, which is highly sophisticated. But when you're a small company, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 seems to think you're just, I don't know, the cabin boy. There's a real cutoff in listening to you. And I'm like, well, I have been in the belly of it all. I've walked through the fire, so I have a lot of information that could help you. But it's not sanitized, and I don't think it's reactionary. But it is some things you don't want to hear. And I think that is, we in this country, there's great things about the country, but these regulators have a lot of power. Just until the last couple of years, the Supreme Court has not cut back their power, and they can annihilate you. It's called persecution through process. You can come out innocent. Like, I won my case. I was completely vindicated.
How long did that take?
It just took, $16 million in a decade. And do you ever get put back where you were after? No, you are not put back. I mean,
they don't make you whole for it. Right?
You don't even get an apology. No, I mean, it's like, oops, we burnt your house down by mistake. People assume that you get your house back. You don't. So it's a really arduous experience, and you can't get that back. And it's been interesting in different cultures that I speak at, the reactions. The American reaction typically is much more demure. They don't want to really embrace that. They're not sure what to do. It's more politicized. Yeah. It's more, what side are you on? I mean, it's just bizarre. Whereas I keynoted CIO Africa in Johannesburg last summer, and it was insane. It was like speaking to a brotherhood. They were just so, because they're more in touch with, government using just raw power and not due process. Yeah. Happening. And that doesn't happen everywhere, but you need to understand that in a civil setting, not a criminal, ironically, civil settings by administrative agencies can be incredibly brutal because they're just assumptions that we make as Americans that are not true. They don't go by the civil rules of the federal rules of civil procedure. They have their own rules.
Written their own
they have
rules.
their own courts. They are allowed to have, they allow hearsay. They have so much power just to drag you through the mud, and it's really easy to drag you through the mud. I like Joe Sullivan a lot. I haven't known him that well, that long. I know him better now. But when it first happened, I was like, Joe? Not that he didn't listen. I mean, it's so hard to listen, but it's like, you've got to understand what's happening to you, and it'd be surreal to understand what's going on, and you've got to get the right lawyers, and most lawyers are not the right lawyers. I tried to get my lawyers to defend him,
Sure,
but they were conflicted out, so they couldn't. They really wanted to, because it's about persecution through process, and that's what you don't understand. If your number comes up, it's about persecution through process. Joe, I consider Joe the perfect storm sitting duck, unfortunately for him, because the Uber board just trashed everyone. And then when you've got your own, the lawyer getting immunity and lawyers and other officers, I mean, you know, your team that you're working with turns out to be throwing you under the bus later. These are things you have to learn about if you're going to sign up to be a Fortune 500 executive. Sure. What lessons do we have?
And most CISOs aren't covered by D&O?
No, and they need to be. And that's the other big thing. I talked about this in Johannesburg. I was like, you need to negotiate in your compensation that you will be covered by your own personal lawyer, and they'll pay for that. Because guess what? That lawyer, you're on the executive team. You're making $500,000 a year or more. You've got stock. You're famous. And you're in big time trouble with an agency, and you're talking to your corporate attorney. He's not your lawyer.
The company's lawyer.
He's the company's lawyer.
So the regulator's out to take care of the regulator.
And the regulator cracked that little world, right? I mean, it's you know, I'm not going to vilify regulators. I mean, you know, they're like everything else. One thing I said in that speech was that, you know, 90% of DC is not corrupt, but 90% looks the other way to preserve their careers.
Yeah,
it's the lack of accountability of the few corrupt ones, and there are some bad apples. And at the Federal Trade Commission, I got stuck with some really bad apples.
Sure. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Right.
So,
well, if you're out there,
my gripe right now is okay. We're getting just complete. Our lunch is eaten by these ransomware operators, right?
Correct.
I mean, the healthcare is targeted as much or more than almost any other sector, because the immediacy that they create with, you know, you can't access images, this patient can't get operated on. And so the government doesn't, they offer frameworks, they offer guidelines.
They offer threats. They offer all sorts of things.
Then when you get popped, their focus all of a sudden is on you.
Because
the victim,
criminal is outside of anyone's jurisdiction.
Sure.
And so the pressure of the framework in the past 15 years is built on the possessor of the data. And the possessor of the data tends to be big and personal organizations and corporations. So it's really easy to focus on that. And I mean, I wish I had interviews from, I was like 10 years ago, I'm like, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
This sounds great to the 95% of the people that aren't really involved day to day. I would have not known so much had the tree not fallen down on me. The tree does not fall down on many people. Joe Sullivan has a way different opinion now than he had 5 years ago.
Sure.
And so does anyone else that's had this happen to them. And so there's some things, whether you think I want to separate, whether you think they're guilty or innocent is irrelevant to the conversation of what the goals of regulators are around the country and the world. So for example, I was in London just before COVID, and I forget the woman's name now, but she basically runs the whole cyber regulatory framework in the UK. And we had a talk after the talk. And what she said to me was, if I would have heard it 10 years before, I would have gone, no. She said, look, she goes, the United States is known as being really easy on regulation and not so constringent. And Europe's known as just regulation, regulation, regulation. She goes, but here's the difference. We are not mean. The United States is mean.
Yeah.
They get you in the crosshairs. It's mean-spirited. They will come at your life.
The whole weight of the federal government.
They will corner you, and it's persecution in the process. And I don't know how to convey that message without sounding inflammatory, reactionary, because I just think it's factual, and it's about accountability. Because look, are we better off? I mean, this is a mess.
Right.
They've been playing the same hammer, nail, and they think, whoa, it's going to pound harder. No, it doesn't work that way. Now, maybe artificial intelligence is going to change things and help us turn on more offense of holding criminals accountable. But this punishing people tighter and tighter and tighter because they're not being
re-victimizing
responsive.
the victims, basically.
It's crazy. And now that does not mean that there are not executives out there that you just want to, go, what the hell?
Sure.
What was United Healthcare doing a couple weeks ago? What the hell? It's like, but we were, the interesting thing about us is we were small, we were nimble, we were new, so we were clean at the time. And because what's it like to take a legacy system or start from scratch, right?
Sure.
And we were kicking everyone's butt because we had a technological difference in our cancer testing ordering system and our access to data. This is like in 05, 06, 07.
Yeah.
And we were just kicking the big multi-billion-dollar. There's two major labs in the country, and we're killing them in our niche because we were just so nimble and so smooth. So we really were totally fine, which is why we're so baffled. We're like, this can't be possible.
Sure.
But the government would never tell us what we did wrong, ever. And when my book came out and a whistleblower came out, we understood why they wouldn't tell us, because what really happened was that cyber criminal was working with the FBI on child pornography. They did not know he was a criminal. They handed him a tool that goes into computers without leaving fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And he was using it outside of his scope of work and doing a shakedown game. Now, if I would say that was going on before I had proof for 6 years, they'd bring the straitjackets and the cart.
Yeah.
And I would sound like a fool. So there was nothing, but it was really frustrating. So the point is, you really, the judgment against people are so harsh. People rush to judgment on little information. And my message, like when people were rushing to just condemn Joe.
Yeah.
Oh, what he did was so terrible. He should be in jail, blah,
And
blah,
the same
blah.
thing happening with SolarWinds.
Right.
CISO
And
now.
look, it's like, this is absolutely imperfect and you don't get it. If you as a CISO in the CISO community are cheering on one of your own being imprisoned, you're cheering on yourself being imprisoned.
Yeah.
I'm not talking that there shouldn't be accountability, but there should be information and due process. And paying ransom is not in and of itself illegal after a mistake is done. These CISOs did not create the breach.
Yeah.
They were not, they're not.
Well, see, that's interesting. What I wanted to ask you, because even though it was a breach, right? Just by it.
For us?
Yeah. By an act.
Yeah,
because he did.
technically, yeah. You want to get real picky legally. It was the government weaponized and the government had possession of it the whole time. So,
Yeah.
but yes, someone came in, but it wasn't what they said it was. It wasn't my patients.
Exactly.
It had never been
But how
out
long
there.
did that take? So I'm
we
trying to
only
think.
did
Most of your stuff was
11 years later. We found 11 years. We'd find for 11
So you
years.
dealt with the FTC for
Yeah.
the most part. So the SEC's got a 4-day reporting rule right now.
Oh,
Right?
you're talking about time to report?
I'm just kind of interested. It's like, what could you possibly know in 4 days?
Well,
other than you got-
that's a whole kind of different topic. But as far as time to report, it's crazy because first of all,
HIPAA gives you 60 days,
well, back then we didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
We did not report to anyone. We had, at least 50% of our patients over 65. It was 2008. We had no reporting requirements at that point within Georgia law or HIPAA, and we chose not to report. And that was the right decision in retrospect when we learned what really happened, because what really happened was it was never out in cyberspace. It was never floating around anywhere. It was taken by a cyber criminal, and who had it was the FTC, the FBI, and this crook, and it never went anywhere else always. And they knew it at the time and said nothing, while I basically burned in hell for 10 years and thought I had been terrible with 9,000 patient data. Now, the point, though, is we would have scared the living bejeez out of about 8,000 senior citizens who would have no idea for nothing.
Saying that
You have to have
PHI
time
was compromised when
right.
it wasn't. Yeah.
And it wasn't. It was never. We learned it was never out there. It was never. The whole thing was never. But it's so hard to believe. That's not normal. It's not normal that the government's going to come at you with accusations about the school making stuff up that turns out to be a lie. Yeah. That's and I try to be real clear. Like, this is what happened to Joe Sullivan, or what happened to me, or what happened to what's the SolarWinds? Tim Brown. This is not the point of that exact same thing isn't going to happen to you. What will happen is there will be some sort of accusation that will be not grounded in fact. You won't know the facts, and you will have to deal with the accusation, and you will have to deal with a greater issue of everyone else's reaction. The CISO community is split in two. There was this whole crowd I called Chase the Pied Piper. Let's crucify the guy. Shame on him, yada. And that drove me crazy.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, don't you understand that you are just enabling this game that's being played by the Department of Justice to put someone in jail so everyone else sits like good people? And as long as you get into the facts of what really happened and what did he do? What was he convicted of? Was he convicted of that breach? No, he was not. He was
But
convicted.
was there any consequence for that?
Well,
That
probation. I think he's still appealing, but I don't. Like he got convicted not for not reporting anything to the FTC because there were two investigations going on at the same time. I mean, people just there's this leap, and they just make up what he got in trouble for.
Yeah.
Or they have an opinion that they don't like what he did, which is fine. You have an opinion that you don't like what Joe did all day long, fine. And you can discuss it and debate it and all that. But let's get down to what did he really get convicted for? And let's learn and the point even isn't really what he just got convicted for. It's look at everyone's reaction and how the mob just loses their ever-loving mind.
Yeah.
And this is what regulators want, folks. It's like you're giving the guys that are coming for you, you're playing right in their hands. It's like, do not let them regulate through group cultural fear. And listen, I come from a law enforcement family. I mean, I'm not begrudging everyone that's a regulator. I mean, there are things, but you just have to understand what's really going on and be careful.
But when you're wrestling with a regulator, the recourse is the regulator, right? So
the recourse is you make sure you ask exactly what's going on. You demand as much information as possible, and you're gonna be shocked how little you get. It is a very different game. This is not a criminal investigation a lot of times, and it's not a TV show. So for us, we had to just hand over wherever they wanted. They would not. This is the shocking part. They would never tell us what we did wrong. They would never tell us what we did right. They just wanted answers.
Yeah.
And it was like, and only 10 years later in the rearview mirror, we realized what was going on was what we thought was going on, which is they were building the cases they were going along because they had none. And then I would highly recommend probably not writing a book that pissed them off. That turned out to really, I mean,
maybe it's just the timing of
it's a double-edged
publication.
sword. It was it was incredibly powerful. I mean,
Yeah, but the book shone a lot of light on
right.
this, right?
So I'm not one sense of remorse at all, and I thought this is just such a kangaroo court system here that I'm dead either way. So I might as well make something positive out of
So
it.
as we see this heat get turned up on the sea level and board,
Well, this
and
is
not all
kind of-
CISOs are
No, they're
sea
not.
level,
I mean,
but-
I look. I cannot tell you how many times I tried to get people's attention 7-8 years ago, and I was like, "This is crazy."
I think they'll start listening now. So
I hope so. I hope so. Because I'm not. I don't think I'm shrill. I don't think I'm alarmist. But I'm not politically wind chasing. I think I don't know if any major corporations want to hire me to tell all their CISOs and exec people to make sure when you negotiate your package here that you get personal legal paid for.
Yeah.
I think that's smart because then that's when you're going to get real talent. I think a lot of people, especially younger CISOs, why would you want to be one now if you're just going to go get stuck in a potential buzzsaw and rip to shreds and thrown off the side when the executive team could turn on you and the corporate lawyers could? I mean, there's some really scary things to observe what happened
What about
in
some
Uber.
practical things like are there things you can do when you're working with a specific
Well, the biggest thing you can
regulator
do,
to
I think,
prepare?
is that do not allow yourself to be placed in a silo. Make sure that you have involvement before there's an emergency. Know that there's going to be an emergency, and work as a team before there's an emergency, so that as from a survivalistic point of view, to make sure that you're not the one that's thrown out of the bus. But also, it's just basic hygiene is so important, and there's other people that have witnessed that, and so that you're not, in a situation where you're so politically vulnerable. Because, listen, it's scary when there's a government regulator knocking at your door. I mean, when they first sued my company, they had 40 depositions 40 subpoenas they filed in a week. And we're talking my assistant, technicians, we're talking, like I mean, they go after it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like,
They want to scare everyone so that the employees can go, Mommy, what do you want to know?
Yeah.
Should I throw my boss under the bus? Okay. No problem.
it's like that day you come into work and the FBI is there packing everything up.
Right.
It's like, oh.
And your best friend's like going, who are you?
I mean, I got a 3-day weekend.
I mean, it's understandable. I mean, I'm not, it's just to understand that it's understandable when you're thrown into survival, you're going to be survivalistic. And you're going to think of your career and your family and your kids' college education, your mortgage before your buddy you worked with for 5
knowing
years.
what you know now, going back to day one, that you're first dealing with the FTC, then things you would do differently.
It's such an absolutely unique situation. I couldn't control. Like,
a lot of these are anomalous, but I think we're going to start seeing
what would
many.
What would I do differently? Okay, let's see. Because I really don't. I'm not big on regrets, even though I might make mistakes.
Yeah.
I would have absolutely written the book. I absolutely would have fought back. I think I knew really early I was dead and we were destroyed, and I tried to give sort of almost a community service over it.
You talk often about having some naivete, and
yeah.
So
I think I'd understand.
I think there's a lot of naivete out there right now.
There
What
is.
the potential? Again, these are anomalous things, but once 100 happen, there's going to be a pattern that emerges, right? And we're not there yet.
I'm just trying to think about what any behaviors that I did that were not okay.
And were you too trusting that? Okay, the government's here to help me.
Well, see,
sort
now I
this
come
out.
from a law enforcement family, so my father, who had a lot of homicide investigations, was a pretty jaded guy. So I was pretty.
Yeah,
he was like, nah.
You were like, oh, good. The
I mean, he was
government's here
telling
today.
me
Yeah.
he was telling me OJ was going to walk. I mean,
yeah.
he was like, oh no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
I was like, what? So I was pretty well ahead of the curve, which as far as that goes, and that might have also been why I demanded so much. I'm just trying to think of what I was sorry that I did, what mistakes I made. I mean, you don't have to do what I did. I mean,
should you be more skeptical? Should you be
Yes.
less open with the regular? Should you?
No, I was actually, my openness got them furious. I mean, when we couldn't, when they wanted everything, I said naively, okay, give them everything, and we dumped thousands of pages on them for them to go through. Like, there, you want the server? There it is. And I did. I'm not necessarily sorry. I guess, maybe this was a mistake, but I mean, I did like they were very specific. This is during the anthrax time,
Yeah.
And they were very specific. Don't use the U.S. Postal Service to send us everything. Use Federal Express, because otherwise we'll get stuck in security here. And I thought, that is the craziest thing. I mean, the U.S. government's telling me not to use the U.S. Postal
Yeah.
Service.
But FedEx, they don't check.
Right.
So
I'm like, so you know what I said?
That's a
Make
hole in
sure
your
you use the U.S.
program.
Postal Service.
Yeah.
And that, and they were like pissed off.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the investigator and I'm gonna be really clear here, because I've been in front of people that work at the FTC, and they've come up and spoke to me and been. So there was a big New Yorker article that came out in 19. I was in the Mayflower Hotel, and a couple of them came up and said, "We're so sorry. Everyone's reading it. We're not all like that." And I was like, I know you're not all like that. I am not saying every investigator at the FTC is a crook. I'm not saying it. I don't believe it. I don't. Just like every Detroit police officer is not crooked, but there are crooked ones, and they need to be held accountable. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this complete self-protection come in. They surrounded him. They changed. They brought someone else. Oh, you see it in the courts. Mm-hmm. You see this protection. This U.S. government protects itself when it slips on a banana peel and does something incredibly bad and damaging to national security, to a medical facility, to just everyday innocent parts. And yet they will let all that go and to protect themselves for their own preservation. Yeah. And that's
I had a similar thing when the hacker sent me dozens of U.S. government usernames and passwords. I reported it to the FBI, and 6 hours later, my friend at the FBI is going like, "I'm trying to keep your name out of this. This is,
right."
I'm like, "What? I just told you they sent it to me." It's like, well, they don't know who this hacker is, but they know who you are, right? So then the attention turned to me and my possession of the information instead of this.
Because I want to be careful here, because you're right, because it's political like everything else. I mean, there
'cause that
are
scared the
people
shit
in
out
the
of me. All of a sudden,
FBI.
they're talking
It's getting
Espionage
better
Act and
now,
stuff,
but back
you know?
in 08, 09, I mean, you got FBI people that don't know how to reboot their computers that are running cybersecurity.
Yeah.
The original sin with me was that the FBI gives this guy this thumb drive with all this powerful software to go into these computers and just take stuff, which, by the way, is a whole nother topic about, government espionage and everyone having no privacy on their workstation whatsoever under the guise of, national security, and who's handling this in their education and their accountability when they screw up is gone. And that's the real problem. When the FBI makes a massive mistake, what's happened? What happened to the people that framed Ted Stevens in the Justice Department? Nothing. So when you have lawlessness in any human organization, I don't care if it's government or what it is, you're going to get lawless behavior. Yeah. And when you have no accountability, you're only good as your mother raised you.
Yeah, who's watching the watchers, right?
Right. And so this is the issue with the judiciary. I've been in front of incredibly great judges, and I've seen terrifying behavior that people can't believe is not held accountable.
Yeah.
It's not. And this is the hard part about all this, right? So that's why I'm like, okay, this assumption that the regulators are going to protect us from cybersecurity issues is, can we finally come to the conclusion that it's not going to work? So like, it's okay if you want to have accountability. I'm for accountability. I'm for regulation. I'm for laws. I'm for clarity. But I'm not for like punishment as a solution here.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work. I think we can now look at the last 15 years, but there's always someone out there who would just say, well, you know what? We just didn't punish enough. And that's what they're doing now. So what do they want to do? They want to get the C-suite.
Yep.
They want to get the board. Now, on the other side of the coin, I remember speaking at Black Hat in Vegas and being like going, oh my gosh, I cannot get these people's attention. They do not understand. It's like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
These people don't understand this is in their self-interest. They need to pay attention.
I think they're starting to pay attention now.
And
right?
unfortunately, it's because
more bad things are happening
to them personally.
Yeah.
Like you could go to jail. So, I mean, because I was just so naive. I just thought, I just thought, well, I'm going to tell you that this happened, and and you guys be careful and don't let it happen to you. And
do you see the potential for this, to escalate? Do you think we're going to see potentially criminal charges against a C-suite?
Oh, of course.
CISOs?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They really want them.
Yeah.
They've always tried. I mean, the Justice Department, there's always again, not the whole Justice Department. It's political. It's who's in the White House. It's who in the DOJ. It's in which parts of the country. When I saw really San Francisco, Uber, there's a lot of activistic people here that think, well, it's for the best, so all means are okay. Yeah. Really jump on the shark, figure out how to get them. Because they know, again, very few people understand what Joe got really found guilty for. They assume it was like the whole breach thing. And you got the FBI testifying in front of Congress saying, no, don't make ransom illegal. We've got really weak tools right now. We have to ultimately protect those innocent victims that got set. And if that's the way that sort of stops the bleeding right in the short run for what we know and have now, so be it. Because we're in kind of anarchy, and so things aren't perfect. But there's a whole crowd of people in this country. It's not their fault. Sorry, but it's like that. People seem to think that, well, I do my job and I work hard, and then legislatures make great laws, and they don't. And then the courts enforce them really well. They don't. Mm-hmm. The regulators make sure it's fine. And no, it's messy.
Yeah, that's not a consistent application of.
It's not
of standards.
But there's still, but the point is, there is always been a history of someone in the Justice Department wanting to get someone at the top of corporation held accountable. So in medicine, we had a guy that wrote a book. It's called Heart Attack. I think he's in Minnesota. I forget his name. Sorry. But he wrote a book. I think it's called Heart Attack. But they really wanted to get, a sales rep, I think it was in Utah, was selling medical devices off market against the FDA rules. The FDA does not control the practice of medicine. It controls the marketing of a product. And so there was a rep selling something that it wasn't approved to be marketed for.
Sure.
And they wanted to. They understandably the FDA gets frustrated with this because there's always a rogue bozo somewhere. But the way they want to stop it is at the top. They're like they don't want the CEO not paying attention to that, so they went after the CEO to get all that taken care of. And so what happens? Well, here comes an investigation. Let's test and see if your executive team is going to stay behind you. Is your board going to stay behind you? Is your insurance going to kick in? Okay, in this instance, they stayed behind him, and his insurance covered it, and they stuck with him. Okay, well, let's indict him. Okay, well, let's see how much people are going to stay with him when there's an indictment. Now there's media. Let's have a trial.
And that's just all pressure. I mean,
This is scary stuff because I will tell you, I know what it's like to be guilty till proven innocent. And
it only takes a couple to crack.
And what happens, the really disheartening part is you lose friends and they don't come back. When I lost a lot of relationships because people thought I did something really, really bad. And once I was completely vindicated, the next stage of the game is they can't look you in the eye. They are gone. They do not come back. There's just no eye contact. And the jury came in and he was 2 hours. Now that was 1.5 years, 2 years of his life. What was the goal? The goal is to get, a C-suite executive held accountable for the behavior downstream in his organization.
So show they're doing something to address the problem.
Right. So that because they can't get now, I understand the frustration of people. Listen, again, I come from a law enforcement family, and crime's not okay, and people get hurt, and you have people to get there. But there's got to be due process, and you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And this sort of group, and this cultural fear, let's get that just doesn't work, and it's dangerous. So and yet I was perfectly happy in my career. I used to have a joke I just. People say, how you doing, Mike? I'm like, well, it's great. I'm living under my rock. It's a little damp. It's a little lonely, but I don't get burned. Yeah. And that was the irony. So here I am.
In full sunlight.
Testifying in front of Congress. Yeah. So, it's like, okay, whoa. And I remember when people said that one summer when I was like talking to the Oversight Committee and I was in the Hill all the time, and I would tell friends, I got to be in D.C. I'm talking to blah, blah, or Congressman so-and-so is calling. And it was insulting. They thought I'd like jumped the shark. Yeah. Like, oh, come on. What's wrong with you?
And that's one of the next things I was going to ask you.
Darrell Ice is not talking to you.
Yeah. This escalated all up. You did testify in front of
Congress.
Yeah.
We had hearings.
Did anything change?
I don't see a lot of things change, but things did change. Not like I wanted to change.
And do you feel like if your situation started again today, would it be a lot different experience? Do you think?
I think one thing that happened, but there is a still general opinion, and I've heard this from regulators inside the FTC that there's a frustration that the regulators tend to go after the smaller guy because the smaller guy will buckle fast. Yeah. All they want is that consent decree so they can pass it around to big law, and the big law can pass around their clients and say, here's an example of what you shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And we're all doing our job, and you'll get our $10,000 invoice in a week. And isn't everybody happy? And that's just kind of a game. Sign that consent decree. And I remember when Facebook was in negotiations, I was at Facebook's headquarters for some party during RSA, I think. And that was going on. And I said to Guy, I know I'm a zero, right? I just have LabMD and I'm a nothing. I'm not running a major company, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you sign that consent decree and give him $5 billion, don't think your problems are over.
Yeah.
Because Dracula goes back to where he got the blood the first time. Boom.
What are we going to see from you next? The saga's not.
I don't know what's next. So I'm
book someday maybe or the fire alarm battery keeps doing.
I'm 63, so I have like 7 more books in me. But I really want to write screenplay, and I really want to. I really want to consult from a level of regulatory education. I mean, that's what I'm passionate about. I just don't know if there's boards or executive teams that want me to help them.
I think there is.
As we
talked about last year.
I have to create a really unique thing.
You got me all fired up, and I was like, no, this is something that they really want.
But I think I have to create something unique and be unique because it is unique.
Because they don't know. They're not
right.
They're not knocking on your door. You got to go kind of be
right, and then build the buzz.
Yeah.
And I have gotten sort of sideswiped with something else right now that I've got to untie myself out of.
But now there's things happening. I think that would give this a real boost. And I think
But it's interesting. I mean, after COVID, COVID had everything shut down. Then I got asked to go to do CIO Africa in Johannesburg. And that was so awesome. I mean, that was just, first of all, for some reason, I just felt like I was in the zone on stage. But I also felt I had everyone in that room was so engaged. And for the next 2 days, it was really great because it wasn't about me. It's about cybersecurity. It's about regulation. It's about the government. It's about accountability.
And lessons learned first.
Corruption. And there's more engagement because there's more understanding that it could be about them.
Yeah.
And that was the big thing. Maybe I was just too early of an adopter. That was my frustration all the time. Like gosh, when would I speak here? 12, 13.
You're way early. That's like, sacrificial lamb.
I would walk off going, this is so demoralizing. I do not want to be people's entertainment. I'm not here just to play out a soap opera.
Yeah.
I'm like going, folks, but it probably was a little too early,
A screenplay, that'd be great. Because it's a great, if you read the book, it's riveting.
It's interesting though, because I was at the Toronto Screenwriters Conference a couple of years ago, and Nicole Clemens, who's now the head of Paramount, was the head of FX at the time, and she said to me about the Americans and Joe Weisberg and about how he really wasn't a big Hollywood guy. He wrote a book, but that serial television looks for really unique books.
Yeah.
An author that has a voice and a passion to tell that story, and he will defend it to the death, and he must get that story told. And they took him and they wrapped everything around Joe, and they gave him a co-showrunner, and that is The Americans that was on FX.
Yeah.
And that'd be like, that's me. They said they want someone that's like a CEO, because I thought, I'm not, I was at something at CBS too. I was there before COVID. I was at I was at Disney and Netflix, and I would ghost some people on TV shows just to learn.
Yeah.
And I remember I talked to this guy at Justified, and I said, I can't come to Hollywood and be an assistant. I'm 50 something. And I said, I have had an assistant. He goes, man, you wrote a book. We don't read books out here. That's impressive. He was like, just get writing, and I got sidetracked because of COVID and then this other business thing I've done. And so now, I'm really motivated to get back to that and do those two things, but maybe 2025.
Yeah. No, it'd be exciting to see.
Yeah. So it's
Mike, always a pleasure. Always love the stories.
I feel
always
like
love the
I feel like
updates.
about 3% of what I was saying, but there was a lot.
I don't know. I feel like I've just, because I've been watching this. We've known each other a long time. Kind of watching you go through the whole thing, and I'm glad you came out the other end. I won't say unscathed.
No, it's scathed.
But
now we're just trying to figure out.
But you want to do something positive with the experience, and
I
help
do.
other
I want
executives understand this new risk vector.
But
here.
I don't want the message to scare people. It's just not all BS and roses.
No, it's another thing you gotta plan.
Not some boring old tabletop you check off. It's kind of a scary tabletop I want to do.
Yeah. No, it's risk that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Protect yourself. Yeah. Proactive.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.